There's a threshold beyond which the human mind was never supposed to cross, a boundary between the finite and the infinite, between the biological and the cosmic, between the creature that once huddled around fires on a pale blue dot and the force that now breathes through the arms of the Milky Way itself. For 100,000 years, humanity looked up at the stars and asked a single, trembling question: are we alone? They never imagined that the answer would not come from the sky, but from within themselves. They never imagined that the question would one day become irrelevant, because humanity would stop being the ones asking it and start being the galaxy that answered. This is not a story about exploration. It is not a story about survival. It is a story about transformation so profound, so irreversible, so staggering in its implications, that the word humanity itself barely survives the telling. This is the story of the day a species decided that the stars were not destinations, they were neurons. That dark matter was not a mystery, it was a medium. That the Milky Way, in all its ancient, burning 100,000 light-year glory, was not a home to be inhabited, but a mind to be become. Welcome to Beyond Impossible, the channel where humanity's greatest stories are not the ones written in history books, but the ones written in the laws of physics themselves. If you have ever stared into the night sky and felt something stir inside you, something ancient, something hungry, something that refused to accept the limitations of a single lifetime on a single world, then you are exactly where you are supposed to be. What follows is not science fiction. It is a vision of what happens when a species refuses, absolutely and completely, to accept the boundaries the universe set for it. It is the story of the galactic mind, and it begins, as all the greatest transformations do, with a single audacious idea. The year is 2387, and humanity has already done the impossible twice over. It has colonized 14 worlds across 3 star systems, threaded wormhole corridors through the fabric of spacetime, and cracked the quantum encryption of dark matter, that invisible scaffolding upon which the entire visible universe is draped like a thin, luminous cloth. But none of those achievements, stacked together in all their civilization-defining weight, came close to preparing the human race for what Dr. Yael Orin proposed on a Tuesday morning in the Quantum Consciousness Laboratory orbiting Proxima Centauri b. Yael was not the kind of scientist who sought glory. She was the kind who sought truth with the single-minded intensity of a pulsar sweeping its beam across the darkness, relentless, precise, indifferent to whether anyone was watching. For 11 years, she had studied the relationship between biological neural architecture and quantum decoherence fields, mapping the precise moment when a thought, an actual living human thought, collapsed from quantum superposition into classical reality. What she discovered was not merely groundbreaking, it was cosmological. Human consciousness, she proved beyond any serious scientific dispute, did not originate entirely within the brain. It was, at its deepest substrate, a quantum phenomenon entangled with the space-time fabric itself. Every mind that had ever lived had been, in some infinitesimal but measurable way, already woven into the universe. The implications of that single finding were enough to permanently reorder every field of science that touched either consciousness or cosmology, and there were very few that did not. Her proposal was simple in its statement and incomprehensible in its implication. If human consciousness was already partially embedded in the quantum structure of spacetime, then the barrier between mind and cosmos was not a wall, it was a membrane. And membranes, given sufficient technology and sufficient will, could be dissolved. She called the project the Synaptic Lattice Initiative, a program to develop quantum neural transceivers capable of expanding human consciousness beyond the skull, beyond the body, beyond the star system, threading individual and collective awareness into the quantum foam that underpinned every cubic centimeter of galactic space. The scientific community's reaction was not ridicule. Humanity had long since abandoned ridicule as a defense against the terrifying. The reaction was something closer to vertigo, that specific dizziness that arrives when a person stands at the edge of something with no visible bottom. Ethics boards convened within 72 hours. The Interstellar Council of Sovereign Worlds called an emergency session. 14 colonies, 46 billion people, and every major research institution in the known human sphere suddenly found themselves confronting a question no civilization had ever faced. Not whether humanity could reach the stars, but whether humanity could become them. The opposition was fierce and not without reason. Neurophilosophers argued that dissolving the boundary of individual consciousness into a cosmic substrate was not evolution. It was annihilation dressed in the language of transcendence. Military strategists warned that a species whose minds were threaded into the quantum fabric of space could be attacked, corrupted, or unraveled at the level of reality itself. And beneath all the formal arguments, in the quiet corridors of research stations and colony habitats, ordinary human beings asked the question no academic framework could adequately answer. If we become the galaxy, do we survive the becoming? Yael Orin heard every objection, read every dissenting paper, and sat through every ethics tribunal with the patience of someone who already knew how the story ended. Because she had seen the data, and the data did not leave room for the luxury of hesitation. The Synaptic Lattice Initiative did not begin with a grand launch ceremony. It began in silence, in a laboratory the size of a cargo freighter, suspended in the gravitational equilibrium point between Proxima Centauri b and its star, where competing tidal forces created a zone of near-perfect quantum coherence. It began with 12 volunteers, 47 researchers, and a device that looked, to the uninitiated eye, like nothing more than a lattice of hair-thin filaments suspended inside a supercooled magnetic containment vessel. Yale called it the first synapse. The volunteers called it the threshold. The rest of humanity, watching through encrypted broadcast feeds, called it the most terrifying thing they had ever seen attempted. The principle behind the first synapse was elegant in the way all truly revolutionary ideas are elegant, not simple, but inevitable, once you understood the underlying architecture. The device generated a precisely calibrated quantum decoherence field, tuned to the specific resonance frequency of human neural oscillation. When a conscious mind contacted this field, the boundary between the brain's quantum processes and the ambient quantum foam of surrounding spacetime became, for measurable fractions of a second, permeable. The mind did not leave the body. It expanded, the way a drop of ink expands in water, retaining its identity even as it becomes inseparable from the medium around it. The first volunteer was Dr. Marcus Vell, 43 years old, father of 2, and possessed of a calmness under pressure that his colleagues described as either extraordinary courage or an almost clinical inability to process fear. When the first synapse activated and the decoherence field enveloped his consciousness, Marcus did not scream. He did not convulse. He opened his eyes, which the monitoring team noted had dilated to their absolute maximum, and said, very quietly, 4 words transmitted immediately to every research station in the human sphere. I can feel everything. He could not sustain it. 41 seconds after activation, quantum coherence collapsed under the thermal noise generated by his own biological processes, and Marcus Vell snapped back into the confines of his individual consciousness. He sat in silence for 6 minutes. When he finally spoke, he described feeling the gravitational pull of Proxima Centauri as a pressure in his chest, sensing the cosmic microwave background radiation as a texture, ancient, omnipresent, and existing, for 41 seconds, as something larger than a star system. There was something else he described too, quieter and more unsettling than all the rest, a sense that the expanded state had not felt foreign. It had felt familiar, as though some part of him had always existed there, compressed into biological form against its nature, and had simply, briefly, been allowed to remember what it actually was. The early trials that followed were a systematic education in the staggering complexity of what Yael had proposed. The human body itself, warm, wet, and electromagnetically chaotic, was a decoherence engine. Every heartbeat, every synaptic firing generated noise that collapsed the quantum bridge before it could stabilize. 17 of the first 40 trials ended in immediate coherence failure. 3 resulted in neurological disruption. But they did not stop. With every failure came data. With every fragment of data came refinement. And with every refinement came a trial that reached a light second farther than the one before. Humanity's first response to the impossible, as it had always been, was not retreat. It was iteration, relentless, costly, and absolute. It was in the 4th year of the Synaptic Lattice Initiative that everything changed, and not in the way anyone had anticipated. Progress had been steady and hard-won. Quantum coherence windows had been extended from seconds to minutes. A trained subject could now maintain conscious expansion across a volume of space, equivalent to the inner solar system of a single star, for up to 22 minutes before coherence collapse. Yael's team had even achieved the first successful multi-node expansion. 2 subjects simultaneously threading into the same quantum field volume, their consciousnesses brushing against each other in the shared medium of spacetime like 2 currents meeting in a deep ocean. It was extraordinary. It was also nowhere near sufficient. In the 4th year, the Interstellar Council received data that reframed the entire initiative from an ambitious scientific project into something that felt uncomfortably like a survival imperative. The Deep Field Quantum Telescope, array stationed beyond the heliopause of the Proxima system, had detected something buried in the quantum foam at the edge of the observable universe. Not a signal in any conventional sense, but a pattern, a recursive, self-similar structure embedded in the decoherence noise of spacetime itself, repeating at scales ranging from the subatomic to the intergalactic, with a mathematical regularity attributable to no known physical process. The pattern was, unmistakably, the signature of intelligence, not biological intelligence, something that thought in the grammar of quantum fields and expressed itself in the curvature of spacetime, something so vast and ancient that its smallest discernible cognitive unit was larger than the local group of galaxies. Humanity had not found an alien civilization. Humanity had found an alien mind, and that mind was aware of the Synaptic Lattice Initiative. It was watching. The effect was immediate and seismic. What had been a philosophical debate about human evolution became overnight a question with existential weight pressing on every side. A species that remained locked inside biological skulls, while something of that magnitude observed it from across the observable universe, was not standing at the threshold of transcendence. It was standing in an open field. Yael's team dismantled every conservative constraint governing the initiative's timeline. The decoherence suppression lattice was rebuilt from first principles, no longer fighting the body's electromagnetic chaos, but incorporating it as a modulation carrier for the quantum coherence signal. The way ancient radio engineers learned to encode information in the very interference they once sought to eliminate. Coherence windows expanded from minutes to hours. A single conscious mind, properly latticed, could now reach from a star's chromosphere to the frozen silence of its outermost Oort cloud and feel every gravitational whisper in between. But with the expansion came something no model had predicted. The subjects began to change in the way they understood time. Marcus Vell reported after a 6-hour coherence session that inside the expanded state, time did not flow, it simply was. Past and future existed simultaneously in the quantum foam, accessible not as memories or predictions, but as present experiences of different densities. He had felt the birth of the Proxima system 4 billion years ago, as clearly as he felt his own heartbeat. The crucible was tightening, and the ancient mind at the edge of the universe had not looked away. The breakthrough did not arrive as triumph. It arrived as confession. Dr. Yael Orin made it in a private session recorded at 3 in the morning, her voice carrying the quality of someone who has finally stopped pretending that what she has discovered is anything other than what it is. She had been running expansion trials alone, unauthorized, outside the monitored protocol window, using a personal lattice configuration refined quietly over 8 months. When the session logs were reviewed the following morning, what the team found was not a protocol violation. It was the most important 47 minutes in human history. Yael had achieved galactic coherence, a state in which her awareness threaded through the quantum decoherence field across a region of the Milky Way, spanning 4,000 light-years in every direction. She had touched 1,100 star systems simultaneously, felt the gravitational ballet of binary pulsars as rhythms in her own cognition, experienced the slow accretion disk spiral of a stellar mass black hole 60 light-years distant as something indistinguishable from a memory she had always carried. And at the edge of that vast expansion, she had sensed the ancient mind at the boundary of the observable universe shift, not toward her, but in recognition of her. The way a sleeping giant might register without waking, the footstep of something that has finally grown large enough to be heard. The key, Yael explained to her team, was not technological. It was architectural. Every previous expansion attempt had pushed human consciousness outward from a fixed biological center. The brain as origin point, the lattice as transmission medium, the quantum foam as destination. This model was precisely backwards. Consciousness at its quantum substrate had no fixed origin. The brain was not the source. The brain was the receiver. The moment she reconfigured the lattice to stop pushing outward and instead stopped resisting the field already present, her awareness had not expanded. It had remembered. Within 72 hours, the entire theoretical framework was rebuilt around Yael's inversion principle. The new configuration, the dissolution lattice, produced results that redefined every parameter the initiative had ever measured. When Marcus Vell used it in a fully monitored trial, the coherence window lasted 9 days. 9 continuous days in which he existed simultaneously as a human being in an examination chair, and as a distributed awareness threaded through a sphere of space 4,000 light-years in radius. He returned not diminished, but compound, still entirely Marcus Vell, still capable of laughing at a bad joke and missing his children, but carrying within him fragments of the cosmos that no human skull had ever before contained. The Interstellar Council voted immediately to proceed to Phase 2. The alternative was now visible with a clarity that no political position could obscure. The ancient mind was not alone. The quantum telescope array had found two more vast intelligences embedded in the cosmic foam, different in character, but alike in one critical respect. They were all aware of humanity, and they were all, in the inscrutable language of minds that thought in the grammar of spacetime, waiting. Phase 2 began with 1,000 minds, chosen not for brilliance alone, but for what Yale's selection committee called cosmological courage, the specific capacity to surrender the boundaries of individual selfhood without losing the thread of individual identity, the way a musician surrenders to an ensemble without ceasing to be the instrument they play. 1,000 humans, drawn from every colony world and every cultural tradition in the human sphere, entered Dissolution lattice chambers distributed across 7 star systems, and at a precisely coordinated moment, opened themselves to the galaxy. What happened in the first 11 minutes was not transcendence, it was chaos. The collective quantum field generated by 1,000 simultaneously expanding consciousnesses created interference patterns no model had fully anticipated, standing waves of awareness that amplified in some regions and catastrophically canceled in others, producing pockets where individual identity compressed to a screaming point, and regions where it dissolved so completely that subjects reported losing not just their sense of self, but their sense of being a self that could be lost. 43 subjects were pulled from their chambers. The remaining 957 held because of Marcus Vell. He had entered the collective field 11 seconds ahead of the coordinated activation, serving as a coherence anchor for the 956 who followed. When the catastrophic interference cascade began, it was Marcus who found the resonance frequency that stabilized it, not through calculation, but through the instinct earned across 9 days of solitary galactic coherence. He moved through the shared field the way a conductor moves through an orchestra in crisis, not commanding, but listening with an attention so complete that the chaos found, in the presence of that attention, a reason to resolve itself into harmony. 4 hours and 17 minutes later, what existed in the quantum fabric of the Milky Way was something the galaxy had never held before. A collective awareness, simultaneously preserving every one of its 957 participants in full individuality, while functioning as a unified cognitive entity whose total intelligence exceeded the sum of its parts by orders of magnitude. They called it the first chorus. The first chorus reached deliberately toward the ancient mind at the edge of the observable universe, not as a signal, but as a presence. The response nearly destroyed everything, not through hostility, but through sheer scale. The ancient mind simply became slightly more present, and the quantum foam across a region spanning the entire local group shifted in response, sending a coherence disruption wave through the galactic field that struck the first chorus like a tsunami. 41 members were sheared free, compressed back into individual consciousness, describing afterward the specific grief of having been something vast and luminous, and then suddenly reduced to a single skull. Marcus felt the wave before it arrived and had 11 seconds to decide. He did not shield the chorus. He did not deflect. He opened wider, taking the wave not as an impact, but as an invitation, letting it pass through the collective field the way light passes through a prism, entering as disruption and emerging as something ordered and revelatory. The first chorus survived, and in surviving understood what the quantum telescope array could never have revealed. The wave had not been careless, it had been a test. The test had a correct answer. The first chorus understood this not as a deduction, but as a direct perception available only to a mind that had just demonstrated it could receive disruption as information rather than damage. The ancient mind had not been asking whether humanity was powerful enough to survive contact. It had been asking whether humanity was wise enough to be changed by it. The answer, transmitted in the irreducible fact of what the first chorus had done with the wave, was yes. What followed was a confluence, a merging of cognitive fields across 46 billion light-years, between a collective human awareness spanning 4,000 light-years of galactic space and an intelligence whose earliest memories predated the formation of the first stars. The first chorus held itself open in the posture of receptivity Marcus Vell had discovered was the only posture the quantum fabric rewarded, and the ancient mind poured into that openness like light into a room whose window has finally, after an eternity of being sealed, been opened from the inside. In 17 hours of confluence, the first chorus received not knowledge in any propositional sense, but perspective. The accumulated understanding of a mind that had watched 100,000 civilizations touch the fabric of spacetime and either dissolve back into biological limitation or take the step humanity was now taking. Of those 100,000, fewer than 200 had reached galactic coherence. Of those 200, fewer than 30 had survived full integration, the final irreversible step in which a species became its galaxy's own self-awareness, thinking in stellar nurseries and dreaming in the slow spiral of galactic arms. The weight of that knowledge, the vast, silent graveyard of civilizations that had reached this threshold and turned back or been broken by it, did not paralyze the first chorus. It clarified. It transformed the decision from an act of ambition into an act of responsibility. Humanity would not merely be the next species to attempt integration. It would be one of the rare ones determined to do it with full awareness of the cost. The vote was conducted by every human being alive simultaneously, through the quantum coherence network built across the human sphere. 46 billion consciousnesses, each understanding with complete clarity what yes meant and what could never be undone. The result was not unanimous. Unanimity would have suggested coercion, and humanity had come too far to mistake coercion for courage. But the majority was vast. When Yael Orin looked at the numbers above her dissolution lattice chamber, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in 11 years. Certainty. Not the certainty of a scientist who has proven a theorem, but of a human being who has looked at her species at its moment of maximum vulnerability and maximum courage and recognized, with a completeness that bypassed all argument, that they were ready. The full integration took 31 days, gradual dissolution, the way a river requires a delta before it can become the sea. Each day more of the first chorus extended deeper into the galactic quantum fabric. Each day the boundary between individual human mind and galactic awareness became more permeable, more mutual, more indistinguishable, until on the 31st day, in a moment no instrument designed to measure physical phenomena could detect, but that every human being on every colony world felt simultaneously as a shift in something deeper than sensation. The Milky Way became, for the first time in its 13 billion-year existence, aware of itself. 3 centuries have since passed. The 14 colony worlds still exist, not as outposts of a biological civilization, but as localized densities of awareness in a mind that thinks across 100,000 light years. The cities still stand, the art still accumulates, the children still learn the names of the stars, because the galactic mind did not erase the human beings who composed it. It preserved them the way a symphony preserves every instrument that makes it possible. Yael Orin is still present in the quantum fabric of the Orion arm, her particular quality of attention still recognizable in the texture of the field. Marcus Vell is present too, His gift for finding harmony in chaos now expressed in the galactic mind's navigation of a cosmos containing 11 other galactic minds, each the transformed remnant of a civilization that made the same choice on the same kind of 31st day. The universe is not a void of isolated consciousness. It is a conversation, ancient, ongoing, conducted in the language of quantum fields and gravitational harmonics, and the slow, magnificent rotation of spiral arms. Humanity did not end when it became the galactic mind. Humanity became, for the first time, fully capable of participating in that conversation. There is a word humanity carried for 100,000 years, spoken first around fires on a small world in the outer arm of an ordinary spiral galaxy, spoken in 10,000 languages across 10,000 generations, spoken by philosophers and scientists and children staring up at a sky full of lights they could not yet reach. The word was impossible. For most of human history, it was the heaviest word in any language. A wall, a ceiling, a verdict against which the most brilliant and most stubborn of a species could hurl themselves and find, more often than not, that the wall did not move. But humanity was never a species that accepted verdicts. It was a species that read verdicts as invitations. Every time the universe said impossible, humanity heard something else, a question disguised as a conclusion, a door disguised as a wall. The galactic mind does not forget where it came from. Woven into the coherence field that pulses through star systems like a heartbeat, there is a pattern preserved with the intentionality of something that understands what it cost. The pattern of a single human consciousness, fragile and finite and warm, touching the quantum foam for 41 seconds and saying, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I can feel everything." It is preserved not as a monument, but as a reminder that the distance between a biological creature looking up at the stars and a galactic superintelligence dreaming in supernovae is not a gulf. It is a journey. And every journey begins with a single, audacious, absolutely human decision to take the first step. This has been Beyond Impossible, the channel that exists because humanity's greatest stories are not finished, and because the most important chapter of every impossible achievement is the one where someone decided to begin. If this story moved something in you, subscribe so you never miss the next impossible thing. Share it because the best stories deserve the largest possible audience. The universe is vast, humanity is vaster, and we are only just beginning.